and here you can see the precedence of these operators. So in this table, highest precedence is at top and lowest is at bottom. That means parentheses have the highest priority, and then the exponents have the priority, and then the multiplication and division operators have the same priority here, and at last the subtraction and addition have the same priority. But whenever you use these operators which are in the same box in a same expression, then whatever operator you use on the left have the highest priority, and whatever operator you use on the right have the lower priority. So in this table, parentheses have the highest priority and the addition and the subtraction have the lowest priority. And for example, if you use multiplication and division in the same expression, then the priority is decided which operator is appearing on the left. So if the operator is appearing on the left, it has the highest priority than the operator which are on the right side. So let's take an example of that. So for example, so first the addition of these two numbers will happen, and then the division of these two numbers will happen because parentheses have the highest priority. And then the result of these two numbers will be multiplied by 6 because multiplication have the highest priority out of these two operators which are minus and multiply. So multiplication operator have the highest priority, and at the end the subtraction of the result will take place. So let's press enter and let's see what's the result. So the result here is 11. And how we get this result here? So 5 plus 9 is 14, and the division of these two numbers is 1 by 2. So 6 will be divided by 2, which is 3, and then at last 3 will be subtracted from this result, which is 14, which will give you 11. Once again, for example, you use 60 multiplied by 20 divided by 30 and then press enter, it will give you 40. But in which order this calculation will happen? First of all, this multiplication will take place because in the table we have seen that multiplication operator and division operator have the same priority, and that's why the priority will be decided from left to right. Now if you want to learn the order of precedence between the operators, then you can use this keyword, which is PEMDAS. P stands for parentheses, E stands for exponents, M stands for multiplication, D stands for division, A stands for addition, and S stands for subtraction. Okay, so you can either remember this name, which is PEMDAS, or you can use this sentence which I have written here. So please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, and you need to remember the first letter of each word here. And the first letter of every word, for example, P here stands for parentheses, E here stands for exponent, M and D here stands for multiplication and division, A and S here stands for addition and subtraction. So for remembering, you can either use this sentence or you can remember this keyword. In this video, we will talk about Python variables and types. So first of all, what is a variable? So according to Wikipedia, in computer programming, a variable is a storage location paired with an associated symbolic name, also known as variable name or identifier, which contains some known or unknown quantity of information referred to as value. Now, in simple words, a variable is a named place in the memory where a programmer can store data and later retrieve this data using the variable name. Now, the programmer gets to choose the name of this variable which is declared, and programmer can change the content of this variable in the later statements. So let's see how we can define a variable in Python. So you can define a variable using any name. For example, you can give my int as a name, and then using an assignment operator, which is this equal to symbol, you can assign some value to this variable, for example 9, and when I press enter, this value 9 is assigned to this variable, which is my int. And now on, I can just get the value of this variable using the variable name. So when I write my int and then press enter, it gives me the value which is assigned to this variable. Now, as I told you in the first introduction video of this course, that Python is completely object oriented and it's not statically typed. So you do not need to declare the variables before using them, or you do not need to declare the type of the variable. And further, every variable in Python is an object. So if you have learned some other languages like C, C++, Java, or other statically typed languages, you may have observed that before writing the variable name, they give the type of the variable. For example, in other languages, for defining integer, they have to first define the data type of that variable, and then they define the variable name, and then they assign any value to it. But in Python, you don't need to define this data type here. And whenever you define a variable, you need to assign some value to it so that Python will be able to understand the type of data you want to store in this variable. So this type of notation, when I press enter here, it's going to give me error which says invalid syntax, because this type of variable declaration is not allowed in Python. Now there are some rules which you need to follow in order to declare a variable in Python. And these rules are: a variable must start with a letter or underscore. Okay, so you cannot start the variable name with a number or some unknown symbol. The second rule is a variable must consist of letters, numbers, and underscores and no other special symbol. And the third rule is variables are case sensitive. So let me show you the demo of all the rules which are related to declaration of variables in Python. So let's say we have defined this variable my int. I cannot get the value of my int when I write, for example, my with capital letter and then int here. And it's going to give me an error because variables in Python are case sensitive. So this variable name is different from this variable name. Now, as I told you, you can define a variable starting with the letter. It's totally valid. So let's define this variable age is equal to 10, which is valid. You can also define a variable with the combination of letters and numbers, and it's also totally valid. But a variable name cannot start with a number. So when you write something like this and assign some value to it, it's going to give you an error which is a syntax error. So a variable name cannot start with a number. A variable name can start with underscore and it's totally valid. But apart from underscore, when you use some special character, for example, hash age is equal to 10, it's not valid. So whenever you try to get the value of age, it's not going to give you the value which is stored inside this variable. Also, you cannot use any other special symbol between the variable names. So for example, I can write age.22 here is equal to 22, which is not a valid syntax because we have used this dot symbol in between the variable declaration. So these are some of the ground rule in order to declare a variable in Python. Now, apart from that, there are some reserved words in Python which also you cannot use in order to declare a variable. For example, these are some of the words which you cannot use in order to declare a variable. For example, and, del, for, is, raise, you cannot use to declare a variable. So let's say I'm going to go to idle once again and I declare a variable called for is equal to 10. It's not valid. It says it's a invalid syntax because for is a reserved word in Python. So now we have learned some rule about declaring the variables. So let's declare some variables in Python. So first of all, I'm going to declare an integer variable which takes an integer, and then I'm going to declare a float variable which takes a decimal value. And then I can also declare in Python a complex value. For example, my complex is equal to 1j, and then press enter, and it's also totally valid, where j in this value is the imaginary part of this complex number. Now you can also use e to indicate the power of something. So for example, I declare a variable my num, and you can write this notation like this. So 10 to the power 10, it's totally valid. Okay, and when you try to access this value of my num, it's going to give you the value of 10 to the power 10. You can also write the capital E here. So when I write my num is equal to 10, capital E 10, and then press enter, and I try to access the value which is stored in this variable, you can see it gives me the same result. Now in order to declare a string variable, for example my string, I can use double quotations. For example, I want to write some name here. It's totally valid, so I'm going to just get the value which I stored inside this my string variable, and it gives me this name Max. I can also use single quotation in order to assign string to the variable. So I will use now single quotation, and this time I just change the name to Tom. It's also totally valid. So when I write my string once again, it gives me the value Tom. Now you may have noticed one more thing here is reassignment of the variable is possible. So first I have assigned the value Max to this variable my string, and then I have reassigned some other value Tom to the same variable my string. So reassignment is possible. So for example, let's say what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my float variable, and then what I'm going to do is I want to assign in this variable the value which is stored in my int variable. So I'm going to just write my int here and then press enter, and let's see what is the value inside my float now. And you can see it gives us the value 10. But you may ask that we have declared this variable name as my float, so we are expecting the float value inside this my float variable name, but it's giving me the value 10. So in order to convert an integer value into a float value, you can use typecasting. So I can just write my float here is equal to, then you write a keyword float here, and then inside the parentheses you can write the name of the variable which is my int. And then when I access the value of my float here, it's going to give me 10.0, which is a float value. So in order to convert integers into float, you can use this keyword float here. Now if you want to convert a float value into an integer, you can just write, for example, my int is equal to int, and then inside the parentheses you can write the variable name, for example my float here, and then press enter, and then I can see the value which is stored inside this my int variable, and it's an integer. Now let me show you one last thing, which is to find out the type of any variable. So you use a keyword called type, and in the parentheses you use the variable name, for example my int, and then press enter, and it will give me the type of the value which is stored inside this variable. So you can see integer is stored inside this variable my int. Once again, type and then parentheses, and now I want to know the type which is stored in the my float variable, and you can see it will give me float as an answer. So we know that in my float variable, float value is stored. Once again, we will see what value is stored in this my num, which is an exponent value, right? So I'm going to just write type, and then I'm going to just write my num now, and then press enter, and it gives me a float value. And at last, I want to see what type is stored in this my string variable. So I can just write my string here and then press enter, and you can see the value which we get here is str, which stands for string. That means in my string value is stored. Now it's totally possible to use the operators with variables. So I want to add the value stored in my int plus my float here, and this will give me 20 because my int have the value 10 and my float have the value 10.10. So the result is 20.0 here. So this is how you can use variables and types in Python. In this video, we will see how to use print function in order to print output on the